Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to learn more about Proposition HH. I'm Beth Hendricks, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado, and I'm pleased to welcome you. The League of Women Voters has a mission to empower voters and defend democracy, and tonight you'll be empowered as voters by becoming more informed about your ballot. LWVCO has been providing education on Colorado ballot issues since 1936, and we're not stopping now. To find additional information about what's on your ballot, vote411.org is an excellent nonpartisan resource created by the League that makes it easy to plan your vote. So if you haven't already filled out your ballot, Vote 411 will be a great help. Before I begin introductions, some housekeeping. Questions for our speakers may be submitted through the chat box. Any unsuitable behavior or questions will be removed from this presentation immediately, as per the agreement you signed when you registered for this event. Now on to our speakers. Carrie Kennedy was born in Colorado and attended Manual High School in Denver. She holds a bachelor's degree from St. Lawrence University, a master's degree from Columbia University, and a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Denver School of Law. Kennedy worked as a budget analyst in Governor Romer's Office of State Planning and Budgeting, and then as a fiscal analyst for the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. From 2007 to 2011, Kennedy served as Colorado State Treasurer. In July 2011, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock appointed Kennedy as the city's chief financial officer, and a month later, he appointed her deputy mayor. She currently serves as an advisor to Governor Jared Polis. Senate President Steve Fenberg was born in Toledo, Ohio, and was educated at the University of Colorado Boulder. During his time at college, he founded New Era with Leslie Herod and Joe Neguse and registered 150,000 voters while serving as its director. He was elected to the Colorado Senate in the 2016 election, was selected to become the majority leader in 2018, and was reelected in 2020. In February 2022, he was selected as the president of the Senate. Welcome, President Fenberg, Treasurer Kennedy.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, for having us. Should we just jump in?
Please do.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining this evening. It's always great to talk to the League of Women Voters, some of the most engaged folks to have a conversation with around election time. So great to see so many of you. I'm going to present some slides. Carrie's going to help along the way, and then we're both going to jump in on whatever questions folks have. So we'll try to spend most of the time on Q&A, so we're actually answering questions that all of you want us to be prioritizing. So let's see here. Can everybody see that? Great. Okay, so we are going to talk about HH today. And if there's one thing we want folks, and I apologize, but my kid just walked in the door, so they're kind of crawling all over me. So at times they may pop into the screen. HH, if there's one thing you take from it, it is that it is property tax relief in this moment when everybody is a little nervous and freaked out about the property tax increases that are facing Colorado. It's property tax relief, but in a way that doesn't hurt the critical services that we all rely on every single day, whether it's schools or libraries or fire districts or water districts or hospitals. These are all services that rely almost entirely on property taxes for their budgets, for the revenue. So you can't talk about cutting property taxes without talking about the ramifications that happen downstream to all these critical government services that we rely on. So how did we get here? What led us to this moment? Well, it's a complex, difficult thing to summarize in one slide, but I think this is the best way we could do it. It really is the fact that we have had a property tax amendment in the Constitution for many years, more than 30 years, and that has sort of led us to the point that where we are today. And of course, that amendment is the Gallagher Amendment. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. It was something that served its purpose. I think was important in sort of setting the rules of the road of how property taxes were going to increase over time. But I think most people felt like it kind of did outlive its moment. And it was in the Constitution, which is always very difficult to, when something's in the Constitution, to take it out. It was attempted to take out in 2003. And then in 2020, voters did successfully remove it from the Constitution. So there was sort of something that governed how property taxes grew over time. That was removed. And around that same time that was taken out of the Constitution, we sort of had this perfect storm, right? The pandemic happened. People are moving to Colorado because of remote work. Colorado in general is a very popular place for people to relocate to. And we have a shortage of housing supply for that population. So all of this led to property taxes, well, frankly, property values skyrocketing, and therefore property taxes for most people skyrocketing as well. And we didn't have Gallagher anymore to really sort of keep residential property taxes low and shift that burden to commercial properties as much as it did in the past. So the legislature responded. We passed a few different bills to provide temporary relief, but this wasn't something we could do long term in the legislature because, as we talked about, you can't cut property taxes without backfilling the critical services that rely on those tax revenues. So that's what led us to today. HH is the compromise approach. It is a legislative solution that voters have to approve at the ballot box. And the reason why it's so important is because of this moment that we're in. We know that on average, Colorado homeowners are facing about a 40% increase in their property taxes in this coming assessment period. HH helps avoid that crisis that I think is going to be impacting a lot of people, especially seniors and lower income folks and renters, because at the end of the day, renters pay essentially the property taxes for the landlord. It addresses this moment in time, but does it in a way that's responsible and doesn't hurt the services that rely on property tax revenue. So if there was a Prop HH for dummies, it would essentially be that the question is, shall the state cut property taxes and then backfill the important services that property taxes pay for from Tabor surplus? So let's dig in a little bit more on that. So what is Prop HH actually doing? How is it providing the relief? When it's all said and done, it's about $1 to $1.6 billion in relief every single year for the 10-year period that HH is in effect. Number one, it reduces property taxes for basically everybody, no matter the type of property you own, whether it's a residential property, a commercial property, a multifamily property. It reduces property taxes by reducing the assessment rate. So this is the assessment rate that is set by the state of Colorado. It reduces that at different levels for different types of properties because they're all at different levels as it is. But everybody essentially gets a reduction. It also provides a $50,000 deduction for owner-occupied homes. So if it's your primary residence, if it's a home that you own and you live in it, you get a $50,000 deduction in the first year, and every year thereafter, it's $40,000. This is important because it's a more progressive approach to providing property tax relief because, of course, $50,000 for someone in a $300,000 home is much more meaningful than someone who lives in a $2 million home. So it is something that is impactful for people that need the relief the most. So number one, it reduces property taxes for everybody. Number two, it provides targeted relief for seniors and for renters, two groups that we think are some of the most vulnerable to the fact that cost of living is increasing so fast. So the way it does that, number one, it increases the senior homestead exemption essentially because it adds that $50,000 deduction to the senior homestead exemption, which is $100,000. It makes the senior homestead exemption essentially portable. right now, if you have the senior homestead exemption, which knocks $100,000 off the value of your home for tax purposes, if you move, you essentially lose that benefit, and you have to wait another 10 years to get it back because you have to live in your home for 10 years before you qualify. This allows you to make that portable, so you can downsize, you can move to a condo, you can move to a new home, and you still get the senior homestead exemption value. You don't lose it. And it's also retroactive. So if you have moved in the last year or two and you lost it, this would allow you to regain that exemption. It also provides $20 million a year in low income rental assistance, specifically to help lower income folks who are facing rent increases as a result of property taxes going up. Like I said, when property taxes go up, we almost always will see that increase passed along to a renter in the form of an increased rental bill. This is funding that specifically will help folks weather that impact. And then number three, what it does is it caps future tax growth to make sure that we're not just right back in this situation again the next time property values go up very quickly. So it caps that local property tax growth at the rate of inflation. It does not apply to school districts, but it applies to most other types of districts. And what this means is that when home values have increased faster than the rate of inflation, then the district, the local governing board, whether it's a water district or a fire district or a library district, the default is they have to lower their mill levies to make sure that their growth doesn't surpass the rate of inflation. If they do want to collect the full amount that they're allowed, or slightly more than what they're allowed under this piece of HH, they can have a formal notice go out to all their voters, hold a public meeting, and take action to allow that cap to be waived. So this is important because it provides, at a default level, it provides a limit to how much taxes can go up in the future, but it allows a local community to have that conversation for themselves on really, at the end of the day, what they want to do. Because property taxes at the end of the day they're a local tax. A local community, local elected officials should be the ones that have the final say on exactly how they handle tax issues. So all of that, more than $1 billion in relief every year through those different mechanisms, and yet it doesn't result in budget cuts. How can we do that? How is that possible if we're saying that you can have your cake and eat it too? Well, many people then ask, well, so what's the catch? How is this paid for? And of course, that's where the Tabor conversation enters the discussion. So we've heard a lot about Tabor throughout this campaign. Here's what it does. At the end of the day, HH simply amends the Tabor formula by allowing state revenue to grow by an additional 1%. So it's not, you look at this and you probably are thinking, okay, 1%, that's it. Why are we getting all these kind of mailers and TV ads telling us that this is going to gut Tabor and devastate your pocketbook? Here's what it does. It basically changes the Tabor cap, which is a formula that is the rate of how much state government can grow. The formula is currently inflation plus population growth. So we can't grow faster or more than the rate of inflation plus the population growth of the state. That's the current Tabor formula. If HH passes, it simply changes that by adding 1%. So what it is that it would change it from inflation plus population growth to inflation plus population growth plus 1%. That's what it does. That's the impact to the Tabor cap. So here's a chart that shows what that looks like. What the Tabor cap would be without HH and what it would be after HH passes. You can see the original line there at the very bottom is the original Tabor formula. The next line up is the Ref C formula, which is the cap that we're under right now, and then the Prop HH cap. It is a change. It allows the state to retain additional revenue than they are right now under law, but it's not a massive change. It is reasonable. It is a slow growth to allow the state to retain this additional funding. And what it does with that funding is it reimburses or backfills these districts. Whether it's a water district, a fire district, a school district, they get backfill from this additional revenue to ensure that we can provide a property tax cut to homeowners, to commercial properties, to folks who are really feeling the pinch right now, but do it in a way that doesn't hurt our local communities. Now, after all these districts are backfilled and they are either made whole or based on the formula, they are backfilled the amount of money that they're owed. If there's money left over from this 1% change, that money is deposited into the state education fund. This is the bank account that funds public education in the state. If there's not money left over that particular year, then no additional money goes into the state ed fund. But we think that if the economy continues to do well, and there are still going to be Tabor refunds out there for people for the next 10 years or so, then there will be additional money that would go into the state ed fund. And over time, that could result in billions of dollars. And that's very important because, like I said, we can't talk about property taxes without talking about school funding, because a school district is largely funded by property taxes. So we want to make sure, A, we're not doing any harm to school budgets, but B, we see this as a way to actually finally get to a place where we can do what Amendment 23 requires us to do, which is fully fund public education and also follow the rules and law of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And this is a way to finally allow both of those amendments in the Constitution to sort of coexist, to live together. But lastly, I just want to mention that there is an alternative out there. That alternative is not on the ballot until 2024. And so we really are talking about, okay, Gallagher is gone. What is going to replace Gallagher moving forward? Is it going to be Prop HH, which is on your ballot this year, which provides guaranteed tax savings to businesses, to homeowners, to seniors, to renters, and does it in a way that's responsible? So it doesn't result in budget cuts, and in fact may result in increased funding for schools over time. The alternative is in 2024, Initiative 50. And this will be on the ballot. You may have seen them collecting signatures at the grocery store and whatnot over the last several months. This is something that we think will be absolutely devastating to the state of Colorado. The constitutional amendment, and we know that once those are in the Constitution, it might take 30 or 40 years to amend it or to take it out. And it's not flexible. It does not allow local communities to have any say in how their property taxes grow. It is a constitutional requirement that would limit how fast school budgets, local district budgets can grow over time. And that limit would be 2% a year. So if inflation is higher than that, too bad. It essentially means you're getting a budget cut. And if you want to raise a bond or do something to increase taxes by going to the ballot, there's a chance that then you have to actually get approval from the entire state in order to do so, because it's a constitutional statewide growth limit. So those are the options. Prop HH, which isn't perfect, but I think provides meaningful relief, and does it in a way that's responsible and it's fully funded, or Initiative 50, which probably would result in property tax savings over time, but will do it in a way that I think would almost guarantee that Colorado would be one of the worst states in the country in funding critical services like our schools. To me, the choice is clear, but we are happy to answer questions, talk through the pros and cons about HH, and make sure that you all have the information you need to make an informed vote come Election Day. HH has been endorsed by a lot of different organizations. The Daily Camera, the Denver Post, the Daily Sentinel, and Grand Junction, the Aurora Sentinel, they've all editorialized in support of HH, as well as great organizations like the League, AARP, and many other entities across the state of Colorado have come on board to support Proposition HH as a responsible way to provide tax relief to folks around the state. I'll leave it there and see what questions we have. First off, actually, Carrie, if I got anything wrong, or if you want to mention something that I maybe left out, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, no, thanks. And hi, everybody. President Fenberg, you did a great job as always. Want to thank League of Women Voters for all of your engagement on over so many years. It's great to be back in front of all of you. And I just want to reiterate, you hear opponents running around the state saying Prop HH is going to completely eliminate Tabor refunds. Every newspaper in the state now that has looked at that has debunked it. As President Fenberg pointed out, Prop HH actually preserves the constitutional guarantee that citizens of this state get refund checks back when the state generates a surplus, and it raises the cap. It allows the state to keep an additional 1%, but we fully expect when the economy grows that the state will generate large surpluses over the Prop HH cap, and folks will continue to get large and growing refund checks back as long as the economy is growing. Just like today, there are a lot of years a refund. Expect in the future the growth years, and there will be down years, and you'll get refund checks in the years where when the economy is growing, and just like now, if the economy turns down, you won't. And it's related to the state's economy and the state's revenue growth. Limit on the growth in state spending, state revenues, and also obviously preserves the right in the Constitution to vote on all tax increases. I think folks have probably seen the Blue Book. If Prop HH passes, people are going to get about $830 in a Tabor refund this year. So everybody's going to get more even than they did last year. And then in the following year, your refund check would be reduced by about $46. Depends on what revenues are, but people are expecting individual refund checks to be still over $500 per person. And that could also be a lot higher if we continue to see the revenue growth that we are seeing right now. So with that, I'll stop and happy to take questions. And just want to thank you all.
If anyone has questions, please post them in the chat. Okay, Gordon is asking, the senior exemption portability goes into effect in 2024, or excuse me, 2025. What happens if you buy a new house in 2024?
Carrie, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, the measure is written so that if you have ever been eligible for the senior homestead, you can take it to a new property. So even if you moved 2 years ago or 5 years ago, or you moved this year, you were claiming the senior homestead exemption on the house that you were living in, you can claim it again on your new property.
Susan is wondering, what's magic about 10 years?
Good question. There's nothing magic about 10 years, but to clarify, HH is in effect for 10 years. So this is not permanent. What it is something that lasts for 10 years, provides that property tax relief for that 10-year period, and all the associated policies with it, and also allows the state to retain that 1% revenue for the 10 years as well. After 10 years, the state legislature can decide to renew it or sunset it. But if they renew it, they have to renew it in its totality. They can't keep the revenue and get rid of the senior homestead portability or tax cuts. They have to do it all or nothing. And of course, there are this allows sort of a look at it and make sure it's doing what we expected it to do. And if there are major changes, to have that conversation as a state. But we don't want to amend the Constitution and make this permanent. we don't want to do something that ties the hands of the legislature and our elected officials in the future. We want to be responsive to this moment in time, understanding that things may change. And that's why we think this 10-year period is a reasonable way to do it.
What are the best arguments on the other side of the issue? What are the downsides?
I can't think of any. No, I'm just joking. The opposition has said, they probably sent you mail and you've seen TV ads and stuff. I mean, their main attack is that they feel like this is an attack on Tabor. And the Taxpayer Bill of Rights is in the Constitution. This measure HH is not constitutional. So we are not getting rid of the core tenets of Tabor in HH. We absolutely not. Whether maybe some of you want to do that, but unfortunately that's not what this does, if that's what you're looking for. What it does do is it follows what Tabor requires us to do, which is to go to the voters to approve any change in the amount of funding revenue that is retained by the state. And, a couple of years ago, we had Ref CC, not Ref C, but Ref CC. And essentially what that did is it got rid of Tabor refunds. It made it so it de-Bruced, is what we call it, the state of Colorado's budget. This doesn't do that. This simply says the state can retain an additional 1%. And the money over that 1% is then still returned back to voters in the form of a Tabor refund. And if the economy continues to do well, the projections show that people should still get a Tabor refund every year. If they don't get a Tabor refund, it's almost certainly because the economy didn't do so well and there was a recession or a downturn. And that is the case whether HH passes or not, because whether you get a Tabor refund and how much it is entirely dependent on the performance of the economy. And if we've collected more money than what the state's allowed to retain.
Steve, I can add, if you listen to the opponents, you'll hear them say, well, why can't you just give this property tax relief and not touch Tabor? And the answer to that is, of course, then you wouldn't be able to provide backfill to the services that we care about, like schools and fire districts. Right now is not the time to cut the funding for those service districts around our state that are really feeling a lot of pressure to meet needs in their communities. But then on the other hand, the opponent, we can't cut funding for schools and fire districts. They want to increase funding for those things. And so it really is, in so many of the debates, you almost feel like the opponents really they really do support the concept. So I'm not saying it doesn't, it's not perfect, but I really do feel like in a lot of these debates, the folks who are arguing against it get to the same place where they feel like, yes, we need to do property tax relief, but yes, we also want to make sure that funding for our schools, funding for our fire districts is protected. I think there's broad agreement for it.
Jan is worried about counties with lower populations, La Plata, Montezuma counties with less than 300,000 people, which may be ineligible for backfill funding if the assessed valuation of properties were to increase by 20% or more. She's especially concerned about about the fire district down there. Can you speak to that? I know you just mentioned fire districts, but
sure. Yep. Yeah, and I'll probably lean on Carrie in a minute as well to help. She's obviously having some Wi-Fi issues, so I think she's logging off and logging back in, so she'll be here shortly. Okay, so it's a good question. In the HH, I'm not going to say it's the simplest thing ever. It is somewhat complicated. And the reason for that is because property taxes are complicated and Tabor is complicated. And if we didn't want to backfill districts, we just wanted to cut property taxes, it would actually be much simpler. This would be a very easy bill. But that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that our communities aren't harmed. We want to make sure our fire districts don't face budget cuts in our schools, because actually we think that all of those services are underfunded to begin with. So that's why it's complicated. And there are formulas in there that dictate how much a local district in a local county gets backfilled. And there's population thresholds. There's growth thresholds. So first and foremost, I wanted to clarify: school districts get 100% backfill. So if there's any reduction in what they bring in as a result of HH, they get 100% backfill, and that doesn't change throughout the period of HH. And that's because school districts especially have been underfunded, and we have a constitutional amendment that requires us to fund them, frankly, more than we have for a generation. So that's why they are so protected. They're prioritized for funding from HH. The other districts, they all are in a slightly different situation. Fire districts probably have the next best deal, I guess you could say, because if there's after schools are funded or backfilled, next in line are the fire districts, and that means fire districts almost always there will be money left over for reimbursing or backfilling the fire districts. But I will also say that when it comes to the growth, so if a county or if an area has property value growth that's more than 20% since the beginning of HH, then they receive less or no backfill, depending on the type of district they are. The reason for that is because for one thing, the 20% growth, those are almost exclusively going to be Front Range and resort communities. Rural areas, generally speaking, are not getting property value growth that high. Resort areas, sure, but not rural areas, generally speaking. And so the way HH was written, and the reason why some communities sort of get cut off and others continue to be able to access the backfill, is because we know rural communities aren't going to be enjoying the type of growth that Front Range communities are right now. So we didn't want to keep backfilling a Boulder County when maybe their growth is already 25-30%. They don't need to be subsidized essentially from the state. But a rural area, they're probably not going to get to 20% value increases. And so they need support, because they already are suffering, frankly, because rural areas suffered from Gallagher, because they don't really have commercial properties in rural areas. So there wasn't much commercial property that sort of moved the burden to. So long story short, what HH does is it prioritizes certain services like schools and fire districts, and it prioritizes backfill for rural areas that won't have property value growth as high or as fast as the Front Range major cities will. That's a kind of a long-winded explanation, but we don't. We think if it's a rural area fire district, it's especially going to be taken care of and get access to backfill funding from HH. Carrie, is there anything else you would add about that? The question was sort of around specifically, I think, La Plata and the fire district there.
Yeah, I would just add that importantly, Prop HH lets every taxing district in the state, and there are almost 4,000 of them, generate really substantial growth during this assessment in their property tax revenues. So you're talking about at least 20%. And for a lot of those districts, they're going to see 30 or 40 or even 50% increase in their property tax revenues, even with the statewide reductions that are in HH. So they start from a baseline of seeing a really healthy increase in their revenues. Then on top of that comes the backfill with the from the reduction in the assessment rates. So importantly, what Prop HH was designed to do is make sure all districts across the state have really healthy, substantial growth in their revenues to meet their community's needs. And then, as President Fenberg pointed out, for those districts that don't have healthy growth, they're going to get propped up with this backfill. And for schools and for fire districts, they're going to get, you know, what I think our opponents continue to call a windfall, because they're going to get substantial healthy growth in the natural base and their property tax revenues. And on top of that, they're going to get backfill from the state. And there's a reason for that. As President Fenberg mentioned, that schools have been underfunded. So there's a catch up here. And with fire districts, hospital districts, health and ambulance service districts, they've really been challenged under the Gallagher Amendment. And so want to make sure that their revenues catch up and are stabilized going forward.
Okay. Thank you. Mary says, I've heard that Utah has already approved this. Can you tell us of Utah's experience?
Carrie, I'll let you speak to that because I think you're a little more familiar with that part.
Yeah, sure. And sorry, I've turned my camera off, everybody. I think my internet was cutting out. So hopefully it's clearer. You can hear me better with my camera off. So yeah, as President Fenberg mentioned, a big part of Prop HH is to make sure property owners are protected from big increases in their property taxes going forward. It's like, what replaces the Gallagher Amendment? What's in place to ensure that in years going forward, when your values go up, that you don't see a big run up in your property tax bill? And we worked with groups from around the country that have a lot of expertise in this and looked at best practices from around the country. And Utah is the state that folks really think have the best practice in terms of balancing protecting property owners and ensuring local governments have stable revenue base, a stable tax structure. And Utah uses what's called truth in taxation cap. Sometimes we call it a participatory taxation cap, but it does cap the growth in property tax revenues for all of the districts at no more than the rate of inflation. So automatically, all these taxing districts out there have to lower their property tax rates. They have to lower their mill levies. They have to bring them down so that their property tax revenues don't grow faster than the rate of inflation. But the difference between a truth in taxation cap and what Michael Fields and other folks are out there proposing is that the truth in taxation cap leaves complete local control. So at the local level, the elected governing body can notice their taxpayers, their property owners, and have a public hearing and talk about if they want to retain revenue, natural growth in revenues. They can't raise a rate without a vote faster than the rate of inflation because their property values grew faster than inflation, and they won't keep some of that extra money. They can have a public money on, and then they take a vote to retain it. And it's an affirmative action that has to be taken by the governing bodies. It strikes a nice balance. Utah has been doing this for a couple of decades, and their property taxes have grown a lot less, not as fast as the national average, but also they report that at the local level, they can always address whatever local needs that they have. And that is a local decision, which it should be, because property taxes are a local tax.
Mr. Bolton, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, some other questions have been answered by the President Fenberg in the chat. So I hope everyone can see those. Okay, Mr. Bolton, are you ready to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm asking a question separate from Mr. Bolton, but I'm just kind of wondering about the advantages of Proposition HH, for those who are renters. We have lots and lots of renters in the state, and they will not be getting Tabor funds.
Yeah, so it's a good question. And this is one of the issues that I think the opposition has been kind of talking about, but it impacts renters in two different ways. Number one, if there's an increase in the landlord's property taxes, and this isn't to speak poorly of landlords, but most landlords are going to cover their costs by increasing rent. That's just how it goes. So if their property taxes go up, that most likely results in increasing the rent on their tenant. And so simply by passing HH and reducing that increase of property taxes, so cutting it roughly in half for the average property, that means that the renter is not going to see the rent increase that they would see otherwise. So that inherently is a benefit because, renters don't literally pay property taxes, right? They don't get a bill in the mail from the county, but they still are paying property taxes one way or another, just like they're paying, essentially they're paying the landlord's mortgage rate. They're paying whatever the landlord has as an expense. They are charging the renter for it to keep their expenses under control. So HH helps renters significantly because the alternative is consequential and I think disastrous increases in rent over time. So a 40% increase in property taxes absolutely would result in significant increases in people's rent, which I don't think people can afford right now. Rent is already too high for a lot of people, and the cost of living has been increasing way too fast. The second way that HH impacts renters is it actually allocates up to $20 million a year in low-income rental assistance. And this rental assistance is specifically for people to help them sort of weather the burden of increases in their rent from property tax increases. And so it's a new program. It's a new fund source. And it's something that, is not going to solve the problem. We think the need that's out there is much greater than $20 million. But it does supplement the already existing programs that we have and that we funded through the legislature. And this is, it's meaningful. $20 million a year, every year, is a meaningful ongoing increase in revenue for rental assistance. So it helps renters indirectly, and then it also helps low-income renters directly. And we think it's appropriate to have some of these benefits really target the people that are most impacted. Some people pay rent and they can afford an increase in their rent because they have a high-end rental unit. This $20 million would not be for them, right? So it's another way that HH is not only providing relief, but targeting a lot of that relief to those that we know are most vulnerable and are already kind of living on the edge from the cost of living increases that we've seen in recent years in Colorado. And also, I just wanted to just clarify one other thing that was in the question. Again, HH doesn't get rid of Tabor refunds. Whether you're a renter, a homeowner, it does not get rid of Tabor refunds. It simply will reduce the Tabor refund. So for instance, in 2024, the average reduction is $46. But we're projecting for Tabor refunds in 2024 to still be several $100s. It could be $500, $600 maybe. A reduction on average of $46 in return for getting essentially, on average $500 off of your property tax bill. And, these other important policies like the rental assistance and the senior homestead exemption portability and things like that.
Okay. Cindy asks, so the public votes once on this and then the legislature is able to renew it without a new ballot proposal?
So the vote in this coming election is the vote to allow it for 10 years to happen. After that 10-year period, the legislature can renew it or they can allow it to sunset. But they can't renew the revenue, the Tabor formula change without also renewing the tax cuts. So they have to be done in tandem. You can't just do one, not the other. And so, the legislature and frankly, the state, I think, will assess where we are when it comes to property values, the growth that we've seen over those 10 years, where funding is for the districts around our state, and make a decision. I also think, there will probably be other ballot measures on the ballot between now and then. The world, I don't think anybody can project what the world's going to look like in 10 years, let alone what the economy is going to look like 6 months from now. So this was a way to say that we don't really want, I don't think voters want to be having this fight, this discussion, this kind of battle every couple of years. They want legislators and elected officials to solve problems and to do it responsibly, but allow there to be sort of a safety release valve, something that allows everyone to check back in to make sure it's still working as intended. And if it's not, try something different, put something different on the ballot at that point if there's a change that needs to be made. Or maybe the economy is going to be in such a unique place that they renew the tax cuts because that's something they could just do on their own and have a different ballot measure around the revenue retention. I think that'll be a decision for elected officials and voters a decade from now. Luckily, I will not be involved because I'll be termed out. But I fully expect it'll be a robust discussion and debate, and probably even before then, because I assume there will be other fiscal measures on the ballot in the meantime.
Have there been any projections on how HH would potentially impact per pupil revenue allotments for Colorado schools?
I'll let the expert take that one.
Yeah, so we only forecast out a couple of years. The state doesn't, the state's economists only project 3 years. And we're very confident that if HH passes, the state will be able to completely eliminate the budget stabilization factor. It's also been known as the negative factor. That has been the ongoing reduction in per pupil funding below voter approved levels, going all the way back to Amendment 23. So Prop HH will give us the ability to fully fund public education to the voter approved levels. And because we've seen such good growth in values, such strong growth in values around the state, Prop HH gives school districts the ability to fully benefit, realize the full benefit in their revenues from the growth in those values, even though we're not passing the costs onto the property owners, onto the homeowners. The schools, because they are fully backfilled 100% of any reduction, in essence, are going to realize the full benefit of that growth. And that will give the state and local school districts the ability to raise their base funding and increase their per pupil funding over and sustain it over the decade. And that really is why we're also excited about Prop HH, is it provides that property tax relief, but also realize the full benefit of the growth we've been experiencing, and they really haven't benefited under the last couple decades with the constitutional limits, the Tabor Amendment and the Gallagher Amendment sitting in the Constitution. We've had growth over the last few decades. The schools really haven't benefited from it, and that is why we've had this budget stabilization factor. And so this is a great opportunity for the state to really share in the benefits of this growth, between saving property owners money and also making sure our schools benefit.
Okay. Cindy is asking, could you please explain truth in taxation? I see you did write a response.
So that's the local cap that I just was talking about. I don't know if my internet interrupted, but that's the process that local governments will be able to go through. We are limiting the growth in property tax collections for all districts in the state, with the exception of school districts and what we call home rule districts. Everybody else, thousands of districts out there, will have their property tax revenue capped at the rate of inflation. to notice their taxpayers, have a public hearing. There has to be allow public testimony at that hearing. And then they, as a governing body, can vote to retain revenue over that cap. So this is representative democracy. And truth in taxation is the name that Utah uses for this process. There is a cap that limits revenues, but a process that allows for local exceptions, local overrides, and the local elected officials to be able to make decisions for their communities.
Okay, I think that you have answered successfully all questions. We thank you for being here, President Fenberg, Treasurer Kennedy. Thank you all to all participating attendees. Appreciate your time, your energy, and your commitment to being an informed voter. Remember, vote411.org. And don't forget to vote by 7 o'clock on November 7th. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.